Alright, this is the third and final video in my series on side starters. This is, I think, the least useful side to know about, at least in open play. So I'm also going to spend a bunch of time here just talking a little more about recapping side starters and kind of what I think of them in general, and where my skepticism is and where I think their strengths are. So I built this hand over on the right, and what we're going to talk about is the wrong way side starter, which is to say it has high numbers facing towards the two adjacent corners, not facing towards the middle. This would certainly also count. And what happens here, at least theoretically, is the opponent may be able to achieve something we can't take. But if they ever flip 5, they can get themselves in lots of trouble. Because if they happen, I'm going to throw a somewhat random move out, but not entirely random. If something happens where they flip 5, suddenly the combos can start going against them in lots of squares. Incidentally, one of the cooler things about this opening line is sometimes you do follow up with 6. This is actually a fairly common pattern. I couldn't really get a great example to work because I did not try very hard on this video, but it does come up a bit where the point is kind of to make sure they've blocked one square that you combo off your starter, and so you give your combo card another square. And this can be a quite effective strategy to know about. And here, it's not winning, but it's also not losing. And, if we put in, what's a normal looking move? 8 doesn't look great. You don't have to recapture. Let's put a card in 8. We do have the they do have the recapture of something like this loses because we take 9 to do the recapture. You had to flip 4, and suddenly as soon as you flip 4, well, I guess that's the win here. But stuff gets really scary around this, right? Here, I guess you survive that exact combo. But the point is, we're starting to build these combo chains, and if they want to have a high number facing out, they're going to be weak to that card in 4, and we just play for bigger combo chains. So if you do try to build a hand around this, make sure to think about, if they play an adjacent corner to my starter, I can play the opposite side and start setting stuff up, and that can often come with big initiative. Let's look at a different move. This loses 2. Is that what we just looked at? That might be what we just looked at. Yeah, we just go 9. So, it can be hard for them to go 8 if they don't have a good way to go 5 after. This is the only way they can go 8 and have a recapture in 5 that doesn't flip 4, and it loses 2. We still just take it, and what's the winning line? We combo that. Right. The read combos on a lot of things here, but it can be a neat idea. So if you do play around this, one of the key ideas is to go in 6. Another is, of course, to just go in 8, right? And one of the things this specific version of the hand is designed to do is say, if I go in 8, I have set it up so my 6A, 7, 6 will always have a same in 5, and will always have a same wall in 9. And similarly, if it happened this way, I'd take with the same card, and I'd still have the same in 5 and the same wall in 3. So I'm going to save that card, and as soon as you occupy one of those squares, I'm very likely to play it in the other to combo back. And then the A477 is to have double numbers facing towards 7, so that if they face a 10 out facing there, I do have a way to attack it. Again, I don't need to attack it immediately. The 6 idea still works. And I'm not sure what I was thinking with the 2888 here. I made this hand a while ago. It seemed a decent directional fit and to give a little more power, but I think that card could probably be improved. But yeah, so the core ideas is we take this horizontal or vertical card and we put it so that if anything wants to kind of try to be safe in a corner, it may be safe for the moment, but as soon as this flips, there's going to be a lot of combo potential. It can be paired with multiple cards, one to combo it back from each side, but usually it's going to be paired with a single card. And so on level 10, usually this is going to be, an A9 up and down, paired with something like the 6A7, 6 you see here. On level 7, you could imagine an 8-8 up and down, paired with a 6-7, 6-4, where the 6-6-4 part has the plus wall either way. Right? Something where we have combo potential, and it's important not just to have recaptures. We want combo potential, because we're trying to make it really difficult for them to play around without flipping this card. And so in some ways, the weaker the number facing 5, the better. And if I had built a hand like this, it would be harder for the opponent to avoid flipping 5 or avoid having combos through 5. The reason I built it this way was for the synergy we had already talked about, where I could set up these sames in 5 and these same walls in 9. But you could certainly do this different ways with different builds. I think the kind of cue is you have a horizontal vertical card and a card really good at recapturing it. That makes it jump out that this suddenly is possible. It is kind of less dangerous than it might be with other side starters if they can grab this safety, because often we don't really, like here, I've made sure I can take it immediately if needed, but we don't always need to. We can simply make it really tricky for them to play around our card in 4, because as soon as they touch that, we have combo potential. Again, as said, this is a really standard idea, just making sure we always have combo potential on 4. So I think this is a very kind of combinative style of play, saying, I'm going to set up a lot of combos, and you're going to have to work around them. It is not that concerned with safety. It is not even concerned with denying safety, at least not immediately. It is saying, I'm going to have combo potential, you're going to work around it. And I think that is a big explainer for why it is much more common, which is not to say it is common in either open or closed, but it is way more common in closed play. And I think more viable there, which is part of the reason I don't have that much to say about it. I know some very good closed players use it. I would think they don't use it more than, 20-25% of their games on starter, but I wouldn't really know. That's just off the top of the head. In open, it is incredibly rare. I don't know if I have a single example on record of someone doing this. I probably have a few. I didn't find them in a quick look. So this is a very unusual type of starter, but I think I built a kind of neat hand to support it. Like, I like the synergy of Quistis and 6A76 here, and I like the synergy of 6A76 and 766A, and I have nice ways to put them together. The last 2 cards could easily be swapped out for other stuff, and you'd have a very similar feeling hand. So I think in open this ends up not having that much power. There's a lot of ways to work around it. If they walk into something like this, sure, they probably lose because you have combos everywhere if they let you capture with that 766A. But that's not really something innate to the wrong way side starter. That's something I just happened to build into this hand to try to make it a little more powerful. Something more naturally built in is something like this move, and occasionally it does win on the spot, but usually it's just the kind of move you feel really cool when you make, rather than being an incredible move. Perfectly normal, acceptable move here. You're probably not going to lose after you make it, but I don't think it's devastating pressure or anything. And overall, I think this is not really something anyone needs to have in their arsenal, but it is an interesting starter type I wanted to talk about. And it might be something you should have in your arsenal for closed. I would also be really excited if someone could make this work better than I have, and show how to use it effectively in hands, maybe improving this hand, maybe coming up with your own concept of it. I would suggest as levels to consider using it on. I think level 5, there's too many 7s running around for your 7 both ways to be likely to be all that scary for stuff. But maybe 8s on level 6, or 8s on level 7. Probably level 6 would be a better place. Level 9, I could definitely imagine an A9 up-down being quite effective. And level 10, I think it's possible. But I would think level 6 and 9 might be good places to look for this to work a little better. And it might fit the right player. If you are a player that really likes to set up combo potential and doesn't mind giving up safety as long as your cards are doing cool things, something worth looking at. So more generally on side starters, just because, we've been talking about sides for a bit. I think the kind of main use of sides, as I see it, is to force the game into a certain kind of direction, right? If the opponent has all up-down cards, which we don't see here, and you go in 4, it's just a nightmare for them to play. Their cards just never hit more than one thing. Imagine a hand of, like, Ramses, 8-5, 9-5. Like, sure, it has 1, but where does it go? It's never hitting more than just one thing, whatever's above or below. And it's always having weak stuff out facing. So Against a hand of a lot of up-downs, starters in 4 and 6 are really powerful. Against hands with a lot of side-to-side, starters in 2 and 8 are really powerful, because often those cards end up kind of dead. Now, if they only have one up-down, then a starter in 4 or 6 might not be so great. For instance, our starter in 4, if, we end up in an L, they go 1, we go 7, they go 2, the middle fills up, and it's just that row on the right at the end, having only one up-down card, that might be a really nice card in that endgame. It is much better at punishing when they have too many of something, and so it can be a useful tool in randoms, but is less likely to be a useful tool in hand games. Then there is the starter that says you have a directional weakness. Maybe there's no corner that quite works, but it says you just have little power facing this way, and I'll guarantee we're directed towards a certain direction. One could easily, imagine if the opponent had nothing higher than a 6 to the left, we could play something like this with Quistis actually to recapture, and maybe that would be safe and a really nice way to force the game leftward and punish their left weakness. So I think a lot of it is about directionality. And we talked about 2 other types of sides. The most popular was the defensive side, right? The side that says, I have a max number facing out. All right, here pretend 7668 could recapture both ways. And I have a recapturer with another max number facing out. That's by far the most common. But I think, interestingly, it's less important than whether you control the squares next to it. Whether you have a good card to put there, I think, is on average in side starters less important than whether they do. And the aggressive side starter says, I've gone, let's even say here, I've gone here, you don't have safety in 1 and 7, and I might. I might not, but I might, and I know you don't. I know I have those squares covered. And I think overall this is a little more powerful of an effect. It stops them from having an easy move, and it gives you a chance to have a next move playing next to it, kind of under your own control. They haven't occupied one square and forced you to take the other. You've gotten to choose which one you want to occupy if you want to occupy. And so I think one thing interesting is I looked at the quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals of the 2 tournaments we've had back, and I looked at how many side types of different starters have been used. And they don't always get categorized easily, but I just wanted to look at them. And we've seen, and, take a reasonable guess at which it counted as. If a starter was more about having a recapturer card, then I said a defensive side. If a side had really high values facing towards the corners next to it, I said a wrong way side. If a side was mostly because the opponent couldn't go in the squares next to it, at least there was risk of being captured there, then I called it an aggressive side. And we've seen 5 total starters in the Icon rounds of tournaments. Sorry, 5 total side starters in the Icon rounds of tournaments. We've seen no wrong way sides. And I think we are unlikely to. I think it's very unusual, and you definitely want to be a pretty creative player if you're trying to make those work. We've seen 2 defensive side starters, and they have achieved 1 tie and 1 loss. This is a tiny sample. And we have seen 3 aggressive side starters and seen 1 win and 2 ties, and there was another position that was winning out of those. So those, from the small sample we have, the aggressive sides attained a lot more pressure and were used by basically Seto and Sir Smokes, while the defensive sides also used by Seto, and I forget who used the other one. Maybe DJ? But I think aggressive sides were the best performing in tournament play. I also did a scan of just how many times each were used by players I considered absolutely top. I think there are 4 top players on the site at the moment: Delial, Seto, Akiyama, and myself. There are other players who are pretty close, but I think there's a clear top 4. And among those, defensive sides were chosen once for 1 tie, and aggressive sides were chosen 3 times, again for a win and 2 ties. I also then included players I consider great, kind of the next 6 or so best players on the site, in my opinion. And adding them into the mix, aggressive sides got another tie, so 1 wins and 3 ties. And defensive sides started being used a lot more and improved to 1 win, 3 ties, and a loss. So Again, very small samples, but I think the second tier of players using defensive sides more and having success with them. That is not to say they use them and were punished for doing so. These are great players using them. But I do think it's worth noting when, so far, the very top players have used side starters, the thing they have cared most about is whether they control the squares next to it, not whether they have a good card to put there, which is the secondary concern. That we should be studying aggressive sides more than we should be studying defensive sides. But if you look at, high-end players, the top 10 or so tournament players on the site right now, you do start seeing pretty similar numbers between them. And yeah, overall, I think both are pretty viable. For comparison, we've seen 2 to 3 times more corner starters and fewer center starters. So clearly the second most popular opening type after corners, but if we filter by top players or we filter by far rounds, sides are significantly less popular than center starters and should probably not be chosen as a general starter type. But if you were gonna be a really elite side player, I would suggest looking heavily at aggressive sides, at what happens when you control the space near your starter. Because I think that is the way to go. I think most people are used to defensive sides. I played one today. I played a game against Delial today for a weekly open, and I played a defensive side. And I quickly fell behind. And I basically calculated out most of the relevant lines, I think, before making the move. I just couldn't find anything else. But it was this natural defensive side where I played in 6. I had a recapture card. But the problem was he played in 3 with a safe card. I played in 9 with my recapture card. And he had complete freedom to set up L's in 2, right? I had forced 1 card out of his hand, so we had 2 cards that could have been safe in 3. So he had complete choice over what would go there. He knew what card would be in 6, so he knew what card he'd be preparing the L against. So he had 2 different good options of what to set up as an L. I did not know if I'd have the combo in 5. He ended up playing a way where I did, but couldn't take it. And I had to be careful to tie. And I had seen enough that the move I thought he'd play, I had seen a tying line against. He made a better move, and so I had to think for a while. I still had the tie in hand. I think, you find a precise 5th move, you usually aren't going to get in too much trouble with these side starters. But also, it was a game, as soon as I made my starting move against a good player, I knew I am never winning this game, right? I am playing for a tie. I'm playing a defensive side where they get safety and they can control the L setup. And I was hoping when I was first looking at it that I'd see they didn't have any L's, but they had lots of L options. And so I just knew I was on the back foot when playing it. And I think a lot of people play side starters kind of thinking they're applying pressure, but actually they're walking into pressure. And if you want to play side starters not as a weapon to hold a tie, but as a weapon to push for wins, I do think the aggressive side is where to more often be looking. And that is my opinion, backed by some data, not much. I mean, this data is very small sample, and feel free to prove me wrong with defensive sides, which I think are a totally reasonable starter type. But if I was going to rank the 3 starter types, I'd sort of say wrong way sides might be viable and closed, are probably viable and closed, and would be a useful but not necessary part of your arsenal there. And you could build a fun hand around them in open. I think that's a fun hand building challenge. I had fun putting this hand together, but it is by no means going to be your best hand, or one of your best hands. The defensive side, I think, is necessary to understand, and there are going to be hands where it makes sense and nothing else does. That's why I threw it out against Deli, was because I thought the hand dictated it. And I had to calculate to make sure it survived, but I thought it was dictated by the hand, and by his hand having a weakness to the right. And so I've played them fairly regularly, never in a tournament, but I don't think in a tournament, but in just random games, because sometimes it's what the hand says. The really interesting thing about aggressive sides is they can look at hand strength differently than others do, right? If the opponent has a weakness to the left, often we start in 4 to set up the defensive side to punish that they can't take anything facing right. But the aggressive side says it's totally reasonable to start in 6 as well, even though they're very good going right and very bad going left, because that means they won't have safety in 3 or 9, and we control those squares. So it gives a little more options for how to see the game. I think aggressive sides happen less than defensive sides, but they might, in tournament games at least, I think they happen more and will continue to happen more, especially at the top level or in the deeper rounds of the tournament. And I also think they do come up from time to time in randoms, but you're much more likely, and you should, play more defensive sides than aggressive sides there, because hands will more often come that just say, this is the clear plan for the hand. You should go with the defensive side. That's fine. That's well and good. We should all play some defensive sides, and I think we all have. But for tournament play, and for finding ways to apply pressure, for specifically saying, I'm going to push to win this game, not just play something solid, but push to win, the thing that's really going to make it difficult for the opponent is if you haven't just created safeties for them. If you have, it can be difficult, not impossible, but difficult to push for a win. You really have to check the resultant elves. But the winning pushes are usually going to come when they don't have a good way to play next to your card. And I think that's kind of the main concern of sides, be it defensive or aggressive, where aggressive is more focused on it, but defensive should be focused on that too. I guess that's all I got to say about sides. For hand games, I think aggressive sides are usually going to be the better build. Signs that might be available, 8/6/6s, right? Like Gafgarian, or level 6, like 1/6/8/6 just says they can never play in 7 or 9 safely, so an aggressive side starter in 8 suddenly makes sense. What other cards? 1/8/9/8, if there are no 10s around, that's going to sweep things. 4/4/4/7, that kind of card says I will always be able to capture. Cards like that can be cues that the aggressive side are available. The best for random games, I think controlling the space next to it is critical, but a lot more hands will show up where defensive sides are correct. So I think I have to say, for random open games, defensive sides will be the more useful tool. Most used by me. I use defensive sides the most, but I do use aggressive sides a little. And most popular is clearly defensive sides. And for closed, I don't know. I think if you look at the best closed players and see how they do it, they do the wrong way starter the most. So I think if I was better at figuring out how to do closed lectures and was also a better closed player who was familiar with this, that would be the one I think the really good closed players focus on. And so if you're looking to make headway there, it might be a nice tool for you there. Yeah, and I think that concludes centers. Next up, I will start concludes sides. Next up, I will start talking about center starters and what to look for there and how viable I think center starters are. And I will say, in my opinion, I think side starters are more relevant and frequent in random games, and should be. I think they are also... I think center starters are more important in closed, and I think so far center starters have proved a less popular but more effective weapon in high-level open tournament play. Center starters, when I was keeping track of stats for open randoms, center starters performed terribly. Side starters performed around 50%. The side starters suggests a balanced game. Closed starters had some advantage, and center starters got destroyed in randoms. In tournament games, we've had a bit of a different story, and center starters, specifically one type, has been really viable, and I'm excited to get into that as we continue into center and eventually corner starters.